jai. Ramacharya Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Sugaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopita Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Navadvip Dham ki jai. Ganga Jamuna Tulsi Bhakti Devi ki jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Go Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutade Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamane Namaste Saraswata Devi Gauravani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Paschatadesha Tadane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna. So it's a great fortune today to have the association of His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj. So great souls like Maharaj can actually dispel illusion, cut the doubts and make us completely crystal clear. That's what the scriptures say, that the association Lavamatra Sadhu Sangha Sarva Siddhi Haya. Because in the association of great souls, the Sarva Sanshaya, the sunshine of the heart can actually completely be removed and we can be crystal clear in understanding of Krishna consciousness. So Maharaj today is going to speak on a very vital topic, which is how to choose the ashram, brahmachari or grihastha. How should one make that choice? When Maharaj will describe about the qualities which one should have if one has to aspire for a brahmachari, a lifelong brahmachari ashram. Or otherwise, what are the rules which are there in the ashram which one is supposed to follow? If one is unable to follow, then one goes to other ashram. Then there is Grihastha ashram, what are the rules there? And how one can make progress in either of the ashrams. That's what Maharaj is going to describe today. Sannyasis are called as the father of the whole community, father of the whole society. So from that perspective, actually to learn from sannyasi like Maharaj, to understand about this ashram, one who has lived the life throughout, at the age of realized Krishna consciousness, specifically in today's ISKCON, because today's ISKCON Brahmachari ashram is quite different from what traditional it was. So Maharaj has seen from the very beginning of ISKCON's growth, the Brahmachari ashram phases of life of different devotees, how different devotees first joined, or some of them continued lifelong, some of them had to go back into Grihastha ashram, etc. So Maharaj has seen the whole thing, and Maharaj sees the need of the society as well. So from a vantage point of view, as Maharaj has, we will today understand about how one can actually decide about one of the ashramas, brahmachari or grihastha, lifelong ashramas. Lifelong, and I say grihastha ashram is not lifelong, so there is a renunciation later. But what I'm meaning to say is either renunciation lifelong or the married life and then later on renunciation. So come, let's welcome His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj by 3 times loudly chanting
So traditionally, the Varna ashram system is defined according to qualification, and we have different Varnas, Sudra, Vaisya, Kshatria, Brahmana, and those qualifications are according to guna. So if you're prominently Tamagun, then you get classified as a Sudra, and if you're a mixture of Tamagun and Rajagun, you're a Vaisya, and if you're a Sattvagun, Rajagun mixture, Kshatria, and prominently if you're Sattvagun, then Brahmanical. That's of course from the higher point of view. Then we have birth considerations also. But in any case, the Varnas define your profession. And your profession is useful because we have material bodies. Yeah? So you need some work in order to support your material body. So Artha, Dharma, and Kama are, we can say, the goals of the Varna. And you have to work and support your body and make a family, etc. So the Varnas are related to the qualities of material nature, and according to those qualities then you do your work and then you make your living, etc. As well as that, then we have ashramas, and somewhat defined by qualities also, because Sudras have only one ashram, Grihastha ashram. They don't go to the Gurukul at all. And they don't renounce at all. The three higher varnas go through brahmachari, and then grihastha, and then vanaprastha. And the brahmana, he can go through 4 up until sannyas. So sannyas is reserved for the brahmana because he's more sattvic and no rajas, or less rajas at least, very little rajas, so therefore he's more qualified. So the ashramas also are somewhat dependent upon qualification of gunas. See? So what's the difference between these ashrama and the varna? The varna is for your profession. The ashram, we can say, is more spiritually inclined. So obviously the brahmachari ashrama is meant for studying the Vedas. So in other words, this is a spiritual education of a person. And then we have the grihastha. So that doesn't look so spiritual because it's married life. But the idea is that if you had spiritual education as a child, then when you get married and have married life, then that influence will be there. And therefore you'll conduct yourself according to the rules of varna and spiritual life. For the different varnas will have particular different rules, but still one will also have the influence of previous spiritual education, so that his goal is still spiritual. This will enable the person later on to renounce. And so the Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, and Brahmanas go for vanaprastha, which means renunciation of semi-renunciation. And then because the Brahmanas are prominently sattva gun and steady in sattva gun, they are more detached. Sattva gun means that one is satisfied not by material endeavors and material enjoyment, but satisfied within. In other words, he's already by nature shifted into getting spiritual satisfaction. So he can become steady in spiritual life and dedicate himself to that more. Consequently, he's also more renounced. So therefore, he's qualified for sannyas. So generally, the upper varnas, they go through stages, brahmachari, and then grihastha, and then vanaprastha, and if you're a brahmana, then sannyas. However, that's the ideal situation, which we'll find described in the scriptures. As years went by, this system was not followed so strictly. So therefore, the Vaishyas and the Kshatriyas, a lot of them didn't even go to the Gurukul. And nowadays we see that they take the Upanayana, become a brahmachari for one day, and then they get married. So it's like this nominal brahmachari life. Nobody gets spiritual education when they're children. Even the brahmanas. Many of the brahmanas don't go to the Gurukul nowadays either. They go to material schools. So as time has progressed, let's say over the last few thousand years, system has become a little bit diluted, spiritually speaking, because the brahmachari ashram is missing. So therefore, what's going to happen to the other ashramas, because there's no spiritual influence there? There's very little, at least. So there are some difficulties in applying that system to the modern day, obviously, because system is not really intact. Of course, the prominent ashram was Grihastha ashram. And we can say at any point in time, over 90% of the population is Grihastha. Of course, majority of the people are sudras anyway, and they are only Grihasthas, no brahmachari education, no renunciation at all. And then the upper caste, generally, they all become Grihasthas eventually. So that's the prominent ashram in society, the Grihastha ashram. And even for brahmanas, we see not so many take vanaprastha, and not so many, very few take sannyas even in the modern day. And even in ancient times wasn't so common. So the renunciation let's say, the stage was much less common as time went on. So we don't even hear about too much, even in Lord Chaitanya's time, people taking vanaprastha and whatever like that. And also very few sannyasis in Lord Chaitanya's movement. He maybe had 10 sannyasis in his whole movement, and was prominently grihastas. So even 500 years ago, the system was not so perfect anymore. We have a lot of difficulty in trying to apply that in the modern world because the system itself is a little bit broken up. And of course, gurukuls are by and large absent in the modern world, so a lot of difficulty there. However, we have the process of bhakti, which is quite different from the other processes. The other processes, karma yoga and jnana yoga, are very dependent upon the varnashram system. To do karma yoga, you have to fit into some varna and some ashrama, and then you do your karma. You do your activities within that situation as a grihasta or as a vanaprastha or sannyasi or whatever, and you fit in and do your duties. If you're doing jnana, then that is also defined by being a brahmana. You have to be in sattva gun to take to the process of study of the Vedanta and renunciation. So both are quite dependent upon the varnashram system. But bhakti is beyond whole varnashram system. So it's rather unique because it doesn't depend upon that system for its birth and for its cultivation. That doesn't mean that people who do bhakti reject that system, but it doesn't depend on them, and it doesn't necessarily create bhakti. Some factor is there because the varnashram system is worship of Vishnu, so there's a little bit of causal factor there. But the main factor for producing faith, which produces bhakti, is bhakti itself, not the varnashram system. So varnashram system has a little bhakti, and we can say in that sense it's a cause also. But mainly it is bhakti which causes bhakti, causes faith, and then with faith, then we get association of devotees, and then we begin the practice. So basically, it is mercy of devotees. It is the cause of bhakti. And that mercy is spread everywhere. It is not confined to a particular varna. It can manifest in any varna, and the faith can also manifest within any varna or within any ashrama. So therefore, everybody is qualified for bhakti, any varna and any ashrama. To begin the process, if you develop your faith, then you can start. And at the same time, we cannot say that one is a better ashrama than the other. This is, we cannot say one is a better varna than the other for bhakti. Now, definitely, there are favorable elements the higher we go in the guna, so a brahmana would be more favorable. But then we have unfavorable aspects of a brahmana also. He may too be attached to his rules and regulations. He may be more inclined to impersonalism in sattva gun, or he may be attached to sattva gun itself too much. So this could be an obstacle also, being attached to his particular brahmana varna. And then ashrama, of course, we would think that the more renounced you are, the better. But then again, even the renunciation can be a problem because you're too attached to renunciation. That's also unfavorable for bhakti. So jnana and vairagya are not considered angas of bhakti because you may get attached to that and then your bhakti dries up. So that could be a problem also. So varna and ashram in itself, we can say, may have favorable aspects, but if we become attached to those particular positions within ashrama or varna, it can be unfavorable for it, also being obstacle as well. So we have to be a little careful. So in any case, within the varna ashram system, then anyone can take to bhakti, and one can progress in any ashram or any varna. And this becomes, we can say, quite obvious in Lord Chaitanya's movement. So he had devotees from all varnas, and even beyond varna, like Haridas Thakur was not in the varna system. Technically, even Rupa Sanatan, though they came from brahmana families originally, they were outcasts also because they worked for the Muslim government, so they were not in the varna system also. And So therefore, Lord Chaitanya had devotees from different backgrounds, and then he also had in different ashramas. Of course, if you're not in the varnashram system, you don't have an ashram at all. And then if you're in the varnashram system, generally he had grihastas. And I said he had 10 sannyasis in Puri. And he had a few brahmacharis we mentioned in his pastimes in Navadvip. But by and large it was grihastas. So in this way he had a variety of people from the varnashram system and outside the varnashram system participating in his movement. So from the point of view of Gaudiya Sampradaya, then we're not looking so much for the varna or the ashram. The important thing is that bhakti begins, and then we cultivate it. So we can cultivate in any position, as demonstrated by Lord Chaitanya, any varna, any ashram, or outside the ashram or the varna. It can be cultivated, and you can get success from any position. So every position in the varnashram system has maybe a plus point or a minus point also. And if you're outside the system, there's plus points and minus points also. So because we have a material body, so that's the minus point in itself. So whatever rules you follow, it can have some plus points or minus points or whatever. In general, we try to, even if we're not in the varnashram system, we try to at least follow certain standards of the varnashram system, certain general principles which are there. So therefore we have rules of cleanliness and conduct and non-violence, etc. So there's a whole set of rules that in the varnashram system that even the sudras follow, so at least we should be qualified with those type of rules. And even if we're not in the varnashram system, we should follow those rules as well. There are general rules for physical and mental stability, so to speak. So we can say there rules of conduct like the yamas and niyamas of the yoga system. So they're in one sense, you can say, basic standards of conduct for everybody. In the Chaitanya Shikshamrita there, Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about the rules of the varnashram being gona vidhi, or secondary vidhis. Of course, in Jaiva Dharma, he calls guna secondary. It means secondary. It also means guna, coming from the gunas. So he says the varnashram system is actually based on gunas, so therefore it's guna in that sense. Which means also temporary, because it's not eternal in the spiritual world. So therefore, the whole varnashram system is, in one sense, temporary. It's not nitya dharma. It's temporary dharma. But nevertheless, we do have a body. So we have to do something in this material world, as far as we can, of course, use the body for bhakti, but then we do have to take care of our physical needs. We have to maintain the body. Therefore, in general, the devotees follow the system of varnashram as far as maintaining the body, etc. So therefore, in Lord Chaitanya's movement, the various people followed the rules of their particular varna. So the brahmanas followed their rules, and the kshatriyas followed their rules, and the vaisyas followed their rules, sudra followed their rules, and they operated within that system to support their material bodies. And at the same time, of course, regulate that according to dharma, which regulates and helps you progress upwards through the gunas and control your senses. So, therefore, we do have some aspect of, even if in modern world it's difficult to institute a varnashram system, we adopt certain rules which are favorable for devotional service from the varnashram system, and they are secondary rules. They're not called primary rules because they are not the primary means by which we advance and develop our bhakti, and they're not eternally situated in us, in our sarup in the spiritual world. Whereas hearing and chanting and serving the Lord, these are eternal principles. This is the nitya dharma. So, therefore, the emphasis in bhakti is upon the nitya dharma, or the eternal practices, those which will continue in the spiritual world. But as long as we have a material body, then we're obligated to some extent to take care of that body, and then we follow the rules, temporary rules of varnashram, etc., as much as we can, and which are not contrary to the principles of bhakti. So, as far as ashram is concerned, ashram obviously is generally according to age. So the young child gets educated, that's the brahmachari. After his education he graduates when he's in his 20s. Then he gets married. And then after the children are grown up, then he takes vanaprastha. And then when he's completely detached, then he takes sannyas. So it's more or less according to age and maturity. A person goes through experiences and gradually he matures and matures and matures and becomes more and more renounced. So this, of course, if we can say, natural to the physical body also, that if you get older and older and older, obviously you cannot enjoy so much. And if you do have spiritual education when you are a child, then you'll tend to renounce more and want to go for spiritual goals later as you grow older. Of course, the Sudras don't have any education, so therefore they don't get any renunciation, no vanaprastha, no sannyas at all for them. But the upper caste get this brahmachari life when they're young, and that should continue to influence them. And then after they go through vanaprastha, then they start their spiritual life or become more involved later on as vanaprasthas and sannyasis. So let's say it's a natural tendency according to age that the ashramas are there. So the brahmachari ashram is say flexible because that's the education, etc. And then after you get educated, the majority people get married, so they become grihastas. But it's not inevitable. So we have exceptional cases, or rarer cases, and that is brahmacharis. They continue to be brahmachari all through their 20s and 30s, or whatever like that. And then there's an even rarer one that may go up until, for his whole lifetime he's a brahmachari. It's called the brihat vow. And so he's a brahmachari all of his life. So he has the option of choosing either get married after his brahmachari experience, or continue brahmachari life, or continue brahmachari life forever until he dies. There's three options there. The grihasta also has options. If the brahmachari decides to be a grihasta, he can be a grihasta. Then he has the option of then taking vanaprastha and maybe even sannyas later on. So in any case, there's a little bit of a freedom available for the brahmachari or the grihasta, that they have options later on. They're not stuck, sealed up in one particular position. So there is qualification, of course, for all of this. Now, of course, the qualification for the brahmachari is he's young. Supposed to be young, 5 years old. So automatically he's brahmachari for some years anyway. And then he grows up. And then the difficulty comes after that point. That, as I said, generally they become married. Then one may become stay brahmachari. So this is maybe where we're going to get the little problem of who's qualified for brahmachari later on. No, it doesn't matter when you're young. Everybody's a brahmachari. But then later on there's going to be a problem. Or let's say at least a little bit of a choice to make. So when you're growing up, then should I remain a brahmachari or should I go for a married life? So that's the maybe the predicament that devotees get into. So this again is qualification, according to qualification. So the qualification here is your material nature. It's not your spiritual nature, because you can be a great devotee as a brahmachari, great devotee as a sannyasi, great devotee as a malecha or beyond the system. In other words, your spiritual life is not dependent upon your material body at all. So you can have prema in any body. It doesn't matter. But as far as material body, then we have to support it in different ways. And take care of its needs. So we have a choice of brahmachari or grihasta at a certain point when we're grown up. As I said, in the traditional system, a little rare that the people become brahmacharis. Most became grihastas. That was the normal tendency. And but then the option was that later on that the grihastas should start renouncing again. That's the ideal system, and give up later on in life. So in that sense, though the grihasta may feel like he's losing by getting married and having to dedicate himself to family life, then later on, then he can recover and do full spiritual life later on again. So it's not that he's lost once he makes the decision to become a grihasta, then he can later on practice the spiritual life. So the other, of course, is one continues to a brahmachari according to qualification again. So qualification of the brahmachari is obviously detachment. We look in the Bhagavatam or we look in the Smritis. Of course, one as brahmachari thing is he has to study the Vedas. Of course, we don't study the Vedas now, but if we study scriptures, we should have a quest for spiritual inquiry. We should be eager for spiritual knowledge so that we can practice spiritual sadhana. So in other words, we have a prominence of our greater interest in practicing spiritual sadhana than anything else. Of course, we can say that about the grihasta also, because the grihasta can also advance. What's the difference? The difference here is that along with that spiritual sadhana and interest in spiritual sadhana, there is less desire for comforts of the body. So we see in the Bhagavatam and other scriptures how the brahmachari, there's this rules: don't wear any shoes, don't use an umbrella, don't have fancy clothes, don't use perfumes, don't do this, don't do that. So it's a renunciation type of vairagi type of situation. Don't eat too much, eat only when you're called by the guru, like this. So it's a rather austere life, which means sense control. And of course, then one is celibate. One does not associate with the opposite sex. So these are the important factors for a brahmachari. Now that is a natural when they're young children anyway. And then when one is an adult, one is qualified to continue brahmachari if he's not disturbed by the material world, sense gratification, opposite sex, etc. Then that's his qualification. How does he determine that? May be very difficult, because we can say nobody is perfect in this material world. So maybe little attraction or more attraction or whatever. So it's just a matter of degrees, how much. It is, we can say, a little bit difficult to determine then. But at the same time, it's not really so critical, because the brahmachari ashram is changeable again. You can practice brahmachari, and at a certain point you feel you're not qualified anymore, and then you get married after that point. So in that sense, it's not a fatal decision, in other words, from the one point of view. The only problem there, of course, is once you get involved in brahmachari life, if it's quite a long time, then to get married and then start supporting a family may be a little more difficult as far as the material world is concerned. Find a job and adapt your mind to a new type of situation may be a little more difficult to follow. But that's a sacrifice one would have to make as if one makes that choice. So anyway, the idea is there has to be quite a lot of detachment in that to be qualified to continue the brahmachari ashram. Prabhupada was very optimistic in the beginning, and everybody became brahmacharis, but then later on a lot of them all got married anyway, so we have to be a little bit realistic at the same time. It's very optimistic that everyone can remain brahmachari, etc., and some will, but at the same time we have to face the facts and understand that it's not so common, it's not that it's more rare than the normal case. So the normal case is people will end up getting married. As for married, what is the qualification? Qualification obviously is, of course, they're more attracted to family life, raising families, getting a little more comforts of life, etc. But Grihastha literally means live in the house. But actually, the Grihastha is actually related to Varnashram system, regulated by rules and regulations, and ultimately pointing us towards Krishna. So it's not just live in a household life. So the other qualification for the Grihastha is that he also has to be spiritually fixed up. Otherwise, it is simply be the Grihamedi life, material life. So there has to be some balance there in the person who adopts the Grihastha ashram. It's also an ashrama, so therefore there is spiritual life there. So, as I said, there's no prejudice against the Grihastha in Lord Chaitanya's movement, because most of his devotees were Grihasthas. Of course, we can say, well, they're all Nitya Siddhas anyway, which is true. But the way Lord Chaitanya preached, he said, whether you're renounced or not renounced, you just chant the holy name, etc. And he didn't put any emphasis on Varna, Ashrama, or anything actually, or even initiation. He says, chant the holy name. So that's at least the beginning, the initial introduction to spiritual life. So therefore, everyone can advance. So we have different levels of devotees: the Kanishta, the Madhyama, and the Uttama. And the Madhyama is, they say, the healthy state. So whether one is a brahmachari or a grihastha, at least we have to try to be steady as a Madhyama devotee. That is, we do have knowledge, proper knowledge, sambandha gyan. And we distinguish different types of devotees. We distinguish the non-devotees from the devotees. We distinguish the unfavorable asuras or demons or whatever, and the higher devotees also. Those are more advanced devotees. And that's actually very necessary for our advancement, to distinguish these different types of people. So whether one is a brahmachari or a grihastha, we have to act according to these principles in our association with different types of people. For the grihastha, of course, it's a little more difficult because the grihastha has to generally work in the material world, so his association with material people is much more. So he has to be a little more careful of that asatsanga and how to relate to them. The uttamadikari could be anybody, a brahmachari, a grihastha, a vanaprastha, a sannyasi, or beyond the whole system, none of them. Again, the whole system of advancement in bhakti is not dependent on varna or ashram at all. So as far as being a madhyama bhakti, you could be any of the varnas or ashramas, or no ashram at all, or same with uttamadikari. You could be any of these persons. So there's no impediment for advancement in devotional service, whether one is brahmachari or grihastha. Probably in the modern world there is a little bit of a disadvantage for the, well, there's one disadvantage for the grihasthas: he has to work harder just to support himself. And work long hours, etc., at a job he doesn't like or whatever like that. So that's the disadvantage in the modern world, maybe. We find in like Lord Chaitanya's movement, a lot of them his associates were brahmanas, so they didn't have to work that much. They were maybe just teaching or something like that a little bit in the daytime. That was it. So it wasn't a heavy schedule for them. Nowadays the workload is much more, so that's maybe a disadvantage, and it creates a lot of stress and a lot of worries, etc. And plus we have complicated systems of education, etc. So everyone has to get their children educated, and then they have to spend money educating them, and all this, and that takes years and years of effort and labor, etc. So some complications for the grihastha. All right. For the brahmachari, also, there are also modern, inconveniences or modern disadvantages also. So traditionally that brahmachari was living in the forest in a hut with the guru. So there was not much sense gratification around anywhere. But in the modern world, the brahmacharis are living in the cities and whatever. So it's quite a different atmosphere. And therefore we're affected by that type of association also is not so good. So the modern environment for brahmachari also not so good, and it can cause problems as well. And particularly now, because we do have internet and social media and all these sort of things, more of a problem, more of an influence, more of a corruption for the individual. So we have a lot of problems for any ashram to survive very nicely in this world. Anyway, the qualification is, or the idea is that one has to be qualified for any particular ashrama. So we can say the more people are qualified for the grihastha ashram in one sense, but of course the qualification is not only that we like to have family, but we also have to be steady in our devotional service as a madhyama devotee. That's another qualification, if we want to talk about a real grihastha. And for the brahmachari, he has to have that detachment. Steady detachment, not temporary detachment, or steady detachment, along with his spiritual practice. And so in this way, he can also progress. So, in any case, as Lord Chaitanya has emphasized, everybody progresses if they follow the process properly. So the process of bhakti is such that in spite of our material body in all of its various forms and qualities that may manifest in different individual level, and get to a higher and higher level until he's no longer interested in the body at all. So that's the great quality of bhakti.
Thank you so much, Maharaj, for explaining. What I understand is the purpose of either of the ashrams is basically steadiness.
Yeah, in a particular qualification.
And also steadiness in bhakti, to actually get a platform to practice bhakti very steadily.
Yeah, so we can say that the main idea then is that whatever ashram he can practice bhakti steadily, and that's his ashram.
So one of the qualifications you mentioned for the brahmachari is detachment. So now there are different types of detachment. One, as you said, is a detachment from sex desire. That is quite a qualification. And also detachment from certain forms of sense gratification, like food, comforts, etc. But I feel there is one important detachment which is required, is detachment from one's own freedom. Because as you said, that traditionally the devotee, the brahmachari lives inside the ashram of a guru. So then the freedom is actually quite a little, because the guru actually decides quite a lot of things. So now in traditional ISKCON, or in tradition versus ISKCON, I think the guru is not living with the brahmachari, but then there is ashram devotees, senior devotees, there are leaders, there are temple presidents, etc. So I think they take the position of the guru. And if the brahmachari who is staying, he doesn't have the detachment from one's own freedom, which means he likes to do what he wants to do, then he is not a brahmachari. Is it not true?
That's true. Of course, we can say that that's also inherent in the process of bhakti also, because even if you're grihastha, of course you may think, now I'm going to be a little free because I'm a grihastha, nobody can cover me. But spiritually speaking, actually we also are. We shouldn't have that idea that we are free, because we're all servants of Krishna. We have to obey his order ultimately. And then of course that's reflected in the whole system of authority. So even the grihastha is under some should be under some authority, and ultimately under guru and whatever like that. So the grihastha should not have the mistake of thinking I'm freer. Also, he shouldn't think that, because he has an authority also, just like the brahmachari. But we can say that because generally the brahmachari is going to be living in an ashram, in a temple or whatever, then yeah, to that extent the freedom, the idea to do everything he wants is not there, because he has an authority directly over him who engages him in certain ways. Yeah.
So is that also not, like somebody may have detachment from sex life to some extent, and nobody is completely free, but then detachment, similarly somebody may have detachment from comforts, but if one does not have detachment from this principle of ego, then I mean, is it, because as I have heard from my spiritual master, he says that renunciation actually means renunciation of false ego. I am not, and false ego means that I am the decision maker, I have to decide, etc. Whereas if the authority rules over, that's called as renunciation of the false ego. And like we have seen in the case of successful brahmacharis or sannyasis like yourself also, that how you subordinate yourself in front of a superior in spite of may not be actually agree.
Well, probably you can say that this is when we talk about detachment, at least spiritual detachment, then it's all inclusive. It'll cover all areas, and if we are truly detached, that means that we have given up the false ego. You would have to, otherwise you couldn't be detached at all, because attachment and the sense of I go together. I want this, or I have this, or I am this, is all to do with our false ego. Yeah? So we can say the two things must go along together. There's a detachment, the idea of independence, etc., would have to automatically go as well.
Speaking from the qualification perspective, because one may not be 100% free immediately, so one has to again situate himself into a position where one can be steady. So, speaking from the qualification perspective of brahmachari or grihastha, so I was asking that detachment, does it not mean the detachment from one's the opinion or the decision that I have to be free, I can only do this? In case of brahmachari, is it not a qualification that he has to have?
A brahmachari by nature is a student. So therefore, he's under an authority. There's somebody above him, automatically. If he wants to be free, then he has to be a sannyasi, I guess.
For that, Guru has to award sannyas. That means Guru should see the qualification.
Yeah. Like a Pararaja Kacharya or a Paramahamsa, then he's free from everybody. But then in ISKCON, you're still under the GBC. So nobody's free.
I think that's quite a safe position. So, what I was saying, because in ISKCON, we don't have a guru who has a brahmachari ashram, as you rightly said, GVC or the temple presidents or the authorities.
Yeah.
So, would it not mean if somebody has to go for brahmachari ashram, that they are very happy to actually follow the authority system? They're happy. They're cribbing about it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. If they want to be independent, that's a sign, obviously, that there's some spiritual problem also, ultimately. Because what is the first thing? Trinata Visunish, humbler than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree, giving respect, not expecting respect. So that's inherent in the whole process. If that's not there, then not only he may not be qualified as a brahmachari, but even if he's a grihastha, he can have problems.
So the second another question comes from the steadiness point of view, that those who can't be detached, as we discussed, so then what should they do? How much should they wait? Because sometimes devotees tend to feel that I can become qualified, say, in few years for, say, lifelong renunciation or whatever.
Okay.
So now the question, as you said, Maharaj, that the longer we stay in the brahmachari ashram sort of a setting, unmarried, whatever, so then the difficult it becomes to go ahead into the jobs, etc. And if one gets it, like my personal experience of all devotees, practically those whom I have seen, those who went from brahmachari ashram for a long time staying, say 6
they have more
years,
difficulty.
8 years, 10 years, sometimes 12 years, I have observed that their material life is so messed up that they can't even practice anything. I mean, they don't come for any temple programs, and they are having excuses because they have no time, now they have to work really hard or whatever.
Okay.
So 90% of such devotees I have seen that they are so unstable.
Is that because just to maintain their family becomes more difficult? Is it? Why?
Also,
or was it maybe even as a brahmachari they had some unsteadiness in their bhakti, and therefore that continued and became worse in their grihastha life?
So also they probably also the suppression of material desires leads to a violent expression as well.
Okay. Yeah. So therefore, maybe we can say a little bit better to be cautious about accepting brahmachari life in general, because if you do that, then you could have more problems later on when you change your mind.
I mean, those who I personally know, I feel that they are not as bad as what they are right now showing themselves. I mean, they are quite having spiritual interest, but because I feel that a lot of suppression at one point has led to a lot of expression now.
Okay.
And then also, as you said, that the material life requires a lot of hard work today.
Yeah.
So if somebody has missed out the youth period of say 6-8 years, now they don't have a backup of finances, they don't have backup of experience, so now they have to slog double hard.
Yeah. So then your message is better choose earlier.
I'm just asking, these are the
Yeah. It's obviously difficult. Therefore, maybe we can say that the choice of being a brahmachari and remaining brahmachari, you have to be very careful about it.
So how long the question was, how long should a person wait? Should there not be an age limit by which a person decides? Otherwise, as you said, that even Grihastha ashram can be a very good ashram.
I probably we can say they could try for a few years. But if they're feeling a little discomfort, then they should probably immediately, then they should change ashram. Maybe 2 or 3 years at most, I would think. Yeah.
So maybe 2 or 3 years. Now, in our system of when we have this kind of a brahmachari training already inbuilt inside the system of like boys or Bhakti Yoga Center, where already the brahmachari training is there, because we are quite strict on those who stay with us. They cannot be breaking any of the regulatory principles, etc. And it's basically a kind of a brahmachari life, except that they have some material duties still. So if somebody has already experienced that a lot, and then still, till when they could actually decide? That's what the question would be.
So maybe the best thing is that after 2 years, then they should decide, I suppose. After 2 years of work, maybe they should decide. What is the experience in other places?
If one does not have a training, then of course it's very good to have, say, 1 year ashram training, and then it becomes very clear. But otherwise, I feel the training of sort of wise type of training is that maybe 2 years is something which should be sufficient. Of course, the person's age may be 22 or 23 when he has worked only 2 years. So he has 2 more years. But can we not say that 25 years, as traditionally we all say, say 21 or 22 a person has passed out from college?
Yeah, 25 probably best.
Now I have also find cases of devotees, those who know that they have to be married, but then they keep on delaying their marriage till 27, 28, 29, 30. So what that?
That's their problem. It's their decision to delay, so therefore they get more problems after on. I mean, we can't, force them, but you just make them aware of the problems. The more they delay.
So the more they delay, the more they're causing problems to their spiritual life as well.
For themselves, yeah.
Also, Maharaj, can you explain that when can the renunciation or remaining unmarried can become detrimental to one's Krishna consciousness? When can even renunciation become detrimental to one's bhakti?
For what?
For a devotee, when can the renunciation itself, like remaining unmarried or a celibate, when can it become detrimental to one's bhakti?
What are the
signs of this?
If the renunciation is artificial, that's the problem. In other words, we are renounced because of not because of nature, but because of other considerations such as position. So if because of position, therefore we're brahmachari or sannyasi or whatever, but actually we have so much desire, then this is not healthy for us, and it's very difficult for us to advance spiritually, obviously, because our attachments are still there. So therefore, in that sense, we can say that type of renunciation is artificial.
Could you describe the symptoms of such devotees? What would happen to them in case if they're artificially renounced? What could be the symptoms which becomes unfavorable?
Ultimately, they would be more distracted in their performance of bhakti. They wouldn't be able to concentrate on the bhakti anymore. So, in other words, it was very difficult for them to advance.
In terms of more grosser symptoms, which would
it'll eventually manifest as sinful activity or whatever.
Also, as they say, lust transforms into anger if unfulfilled. So sinful activity is one, but also could it mean that more rebellious attitude would also manifest.
More?
Rebellious. Anger. More rebellious.
Well, we could say any anarthas would manifest, likely to manifest. So many different anarthas would manifest as a result of the artificial position.
Now, one fear which one has is that how can one remain, like there are attachments, then how can one, when one is marrying, how can one remain sense controlled? Because this is one fear which a sincere devotee will get.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just a matter of degrees. Obviously, we say that grihastha life is a concession in one sense. So, therefore, it's just a matter of degrees. So, there has to be some regulation there. So, therefore, part of it is, of course, personal, just how much they can do. Some grihasthas are more renounced than others, but let's say we have to follow some minimum standards. So, we try to keep up the minimum standard as far as enjoying is concerned. And then, beyond that, I think it's a personal choice.
So if one has to have proper standards in grihastha ashram, what is your recommendation? Like, what should he focus on?
Spiritual standards, or what?
First of all, there are distractions from spiritual life, which are material enjoyment.
Yeah.
So because it affects one's bhakti directly. If one has more material enjoyment, no control of senses, then it affects one's bhakti.
Yeah. Well, I think the measure is that they would have to be able to practice their spiritual life steadily. In other words, they have to chant the rounds, they have to have sangha, etc. They have to do a certain amount of things. If that's steady, then the other part's taken care of. It seems to be under control. So measure it by the steadiness of their bhakti. If it becomes unsteady, then obviously that means there's too much of other distractions taking place.
So if one wants to remain proper grihastha, that means you should focus on some spiritual steadiness.
Steadiness.
In the current ISKCON situation, Maharaj, what is your what is your advice would give to the grihasthas as well as brahmacharis in general? What is your advice? Because you are seeing the current situation of ISKCON, you're going in many parts of the world.
Well, I think the main thing is they have to remain steady in their spiritual practices. That's the main thing, and then adapt everything around that. So whether you're brahmachari, grihastha, whatever, that's the big thing. And then in the brahmachari life, then whatever is suitable for maintaining the steady practice, and in the grihastha life, whatever you can adjust so that becomes steady. That should be the main element.
Hare Krishna. Since it's 8 o'clock, we may continue this some other time. Is there anybody who has any questions? Yes.
Maharaj, you were talking about that a Uttama Bhakta or Anattama Bhakta could be in either of the ashram or either of the varnas.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, what is that factor which determines what a Madhyama Bhakta would be? Is it like, for example, in the case of ashramas itself or so to talk of varna also, the devotees will have their duties to do. For example, if the Rasta has his material, may not have. Mm-hmm. So is it the amount of service that one does, or what is that which will determine that he's a Madhyama Bhakta?
Well, I would say one progressed to Uttama based on the intensity of one's practice and the mercy of devotees and the mercy of Krishna. So we may get there. And that may be independent of the particular varna or the ashram, or even not in it at all. It may also be a continuation from previous life. So it may be advanced by birth itself in this lifetime. So therefore, in this lifetime, not difficult for him to, in any circumstance, to progress to the highest stage.
So it is more in the sense of intensity of his practices.
Yeah, and mercy.
So what does the intensity of practice do?
Well, we can say that obviously, if in terms of grihastha, then he has less time in general, and then brahmachari or sannyasi would have more time. But then, even if you have more time, then it may not be intense practice. It may be, very, very inattentive practice. So, whereas the grihastha, if he's very, very intent, then he can have very good results for that also. Yeah.
Any other question?
In our ISKCON society, for the Grihastha's children, what do you recommend, Maharaj? Whether they have to train the children in the modern education system, or it would be better they could send to Gurukul and train them? Because anyway, if they get a spiritual education at the young age, that will, as you mentioned, it will help when they get older. Probably they take up the Grihasthas or even older.
Yeah.
So
well, there's pluses and minuses, obviously. On the surface, of course, better to have a spiritual education, but if they become a Grihastha, then what do they do later on with that spiritual education? They may not have an opportunity to do it, so therefore then they can't survive in Grihastha life because they can't get a job. All they can do is chant the Vedas. So how is that going to qualify them to work and support a family? So that may be a problem. Huh? On the other hand, the other system where you do get qualified for working in the material, there's no spiritual education at all. So we probably mixed. You have to mix the both together somehow or other. That even if you do have a purely spiritual education, you do have to some practical things by which they can get a job. And even if you have a material education, then you add to that spiritual life and whatever. So in either case, it looks like there has to be a mixture somewhere. It can't be one or the other, unless you want to isolate the whole family from the society and whatever. But that's kind of impossible in the modern world.
Whereas in Bhakti, too much attachment or too much detachment will make us disqualified for Bhakti. So what should a person who is too much attached do, which is disqualified? Then what should he do to advance?
If one is too attached, of course, too attached is also, you can say, a relative term. So the qualification to begin bhakti is not too much attachment or too detachment. No? So if we're too much involved in enjoyment in the material world, we won't have interest in bhakti, and we won't have a steady faith in bhakti to be even practiced steadily. So we can't really be steady in it at all. So we won't continue for a long time. We may have some attachments, but if we can steadily practice our bhakti in spite of those attachments, then eventually those attachments will decrease and decrease. So that's we can say the result of having a little bit less attachments. Then we can at least steadily practice bhakti, and then we can decrease them. If it's too much from the very beginning, then it'll be very difficult to advance. But we could maybe slowly, maybe take several lifetimes.
Last question.
We came to know that in order to make spiritual advancement, it may not depend upon what ashram we are in. But in order to choose an ashram, does spiritual advancement be a qualification? In order to become a brahmachari, one has to have a minimum spiritual advancement, or in order to become that's my question.
Well, in any case, I said one should be spiritually steady in his practice. That's the main qualification. Steadiness in a practice.